Thank you so much for joining us for the new Futurists, on Afro-Indigenous and Latinx Futurism. This program is in conjunction with our Dream exhibition currently up at the Hyde Park Art Center through March, the end of March, 24th to be exact. We're really excited to be joined by Center Program and Dream exhibition artists today, Teresita Carson Valdéz, Monica Rickert-Bolter, and Cydney M as well. Unfortunately, Cecilia Beaven could not join us this evening. She had a family emergency, so we are thinking of her and her family during this time. We are also very, very grateful to have Denenge Duyst-Akpem as our moderator this evening as well. And before I jump into their biographies, I wanted to give a simple land acknowledgement to honor the lands that we find ourselves upon. I'd like to welcome you all by offering this land acknowledgement, which is a small way to recognize and respect Indigenous peoples whose stolen land we occupy and their enduring relationship to it. We acknowledge that the land on which we gather here today and which Hyde Park Art Center has lived its entire 82-year history is stolen Indigenous land. We are here on the traditional territory of peoples, including the Peoria, Miami, Potawatomi, and Council of Three Fires. The Art Center recognizes and is grateful for the Indigenous peoples who laid the foundation for the city of Chicago and for the diverse Indigenous nations that reside in Chicago today as the third largest urban Indigenous population in the country. For us, this formal acknowledgement is one small step in a commitment we've made to learn from and about these Indigenous nations whose homelands we occupy unceded, as well as to those who participate in dismantling inequities in our field and the communities we serve. Thank you for being a part of it. And I would be remiss to not do that land acknowledgement, especially since a lot of the things that we're speaking about in this discussion tonight and within the exhibition itself are directly related to that as well too. I'm going to give a brief bio of our panelists and our moderator this evening. The Dream exhibition is centered around our Center program, which is a professional development program for artists who are ready to raise their practice to the next level. The Center program offers a unique opportunity for artists to develop new work, receive feedback from art professionals in the field, and work towards an exhibition at the Art Center. The course is about 8 months, and it's a supportive peer network and works with many professionals to push the Center program artists to answer tough questions. And our Dream exhibition in particular was really thinking through how these artists want to envision a future and a world that they would like to live in that future. And that's what we'll be talking about today. Our moderator, Denenge Duyst-Akpem, is a space sculptor and award-winning teacher, artist, and writer whose practice and scholarship bridges disciplines of design, ritual, and ecology. She is associate professor adjunct at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, offering graduate and undergraduate courses where she received a 2018 Marian Kreiske Excellence in Teaching Award at one of 2 inaugural Diversity Advisory Group 2016 Teaching Awards for Excellence in Diversity and Inclusion. And in 2020 to 2021, she was a visiting artist associate professor at Kentucky College of Art and Design. We also have Teresita Carson. She's a Chicago-based artist, originally from Mexico, working in moving image, photography, print media, fiber, sound, and installation. Her films have been screened at film festivals and curated film exhibitions at the Museum of Contemporary Art of San Diego. Her recent venues presenting her work include Adsdana, Monet Contemporary, and Sullivan Galleries, just to name a few. We also have Monica Rickert-Bolter, a Chicago-based visual artist of Potawatomi, Black, and German descent. Her artwork consists of traditional mediums such as charcoals and pastels, graphic design, and digital coloring to create expressive characters and tell diverse stories. After her undergrad, Monica became involved with Native nonprofits, where she combined her love of art and education to develop youth programs and resources, including illustrating children's books. And lastly, we also have Cydney Lewis, who began in architecture, receiving a BS in architectural studies from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and studying at the L'École d'Architecture de Versailles in France. Her art is held in private collections around the world, as has been exhibited at the Union League Chicago and Ukrainian Institute of Modern Art. And with that, I will hand it over to Denenge to begin this conversation. Thank you all so much again for being here.
Thank you all. Thank you, Sierra, for the invitation in the Hyde Park Art Center. And I'm really happy to be in conversation with you, Cydney, Monica, and Terry. I want to start with a little kind of overview into this. As some of you may know, I've been teaching, been practitioner and professor in the world of Afrofuturism for just shy of 2 decades, offering some of the first multidisciplinary courses in the field. In 2020, I coined a phrase, Afrofuturity, and this merges the term Afrofuturism and the origins of Afrofuturism, namely focused on this prefix of Afro through the lens of the writer Mark Rockymore, who talks about the Afro and its materiality as a kind of a metaphor for what Afrofuturism can be. And also using the Afro in connection with Malcolm X and the Black Arts Movement, which is where I root my origins of Afrofuturity. This also was kind of speaking to a need to begin to broaden, as we know in the world of Afrofuturism and futurisms, there are many futurisms. Kojo Eshun has spoken to this, the theorist Kojo Eshun. And so thinking about how we're approaching that in 2022 and beyond, and futurity also being a term that is a little bit more in use among the youth and present-day practitioners across the continent of Africa. And so Afrofuturity is a term that seeks a little bit more of a global approach. Futurity, and specifically Afrofuturity, Indigenous and Latinx futurisms are in a sense ancestor work. Reclamations, declarations, celebrations, they are resistance, decolonization as practice, that traverse past, present, and future. They provide an assertion of space, to use a reference to curator Asha Iman Veal's statement, to shapeshift through vernacular code and to identify and commemorate and re-envision new possibilities for ourselves, our communities, and the planet. So this is the world building theme that is so much part of and framing the exhibition. This is the crafting and the creation of the dream. So I'm really excited to kind of enter into this. And on this note, I'd like to begin with a question about the what. Each question and prompt that I have this evening looks at the what, the why, the how, and then looks at future visioning. So as we're thinking about the what, I'd like each of you to briefly describe what makes your work futurist in how you understand futurity or futurism, and how it operates in a sense within such futurity or futurism frameworks. Can you point to a specific work of art, perhaps one that's in the exhibition or perhaps a project, and how you're engaging with your concept of futurism within this piece? So Cydney, maybe you'd like to begin?
Yes, thank you. Well, my work for me is based off of thinking about what it feels like to be human in a world where we have so much of AI and technology that surrounds us and that is pretty much occupying most of our space, most of our time. And I try and think about how would we be if for instance, if we were in the future, and how would these technology and the materials that, especially the materials that we use today, how they're affecting our planet, how they're affecting our minds, our body structure, and things that we are beginning to evolve into. So a lot of my work is about evolving and being conscious of the things that we are doing today.
Thank you so much, Cydney. Look forward to getting into it further with you on this. Monica, Do you prefer Mani?
Whatever you'd like to say.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so a few years ago, a friend of mine asked me like, oh, would you ever be part of this Indigenous Futurism group? And I was just like, what? I didn't really know what all that entailed, and I wouldn't ever categorize myself like that. But since, you know, I've come a little bit more into my own with my art and how I want to present it, with the pastels in particular, as you can see, like I took, so this image behind me is of Kitahala, DuSable's Potawatomi wife, who helped him just kind of navigate the lands over here and get Chicago established to not natives. And I feel like her story is not ever really told or told appropriately, or just, she's just not included. So a lot of my works is trying to make sure that those stories, these older things, they affect our future. Like if people are like, oh, we've never heard of this before, it's like, well, because people either overshadowed or didn't include those stories with the general narrative, or just, you know, when you're in public schools, you only get taught so much, or things are glossed over. So I wanted to make sure as many of those stories are out there. And my images combine just like, I guess, more of like a full rendering technique, and still applying like some older styles that you would see of traditional Anishinaabe people. So it's just trying to find a good balance with that. And as well, I mentioned that I do love children's books. So I'm also trying to figure out, okay, what's a good way to combine that digitally and something for fun that kids can recognize as well.
Thank you so much, Monica. Okay, and then I'm sorry, I'm getting a little confused with the name on.
Yeah, Terry just got back in. I think we lost her for a moment, but she just got back in the room.
Okay, Terry. Hi, Terry. So we are talking about what makes your work futurist. The question is in the, did we? Oh, there you are. Hi, Terry.
Yeah.
So the question is in the chat, and we're talking about what makes your work futurist, or how it operates in connection to or within that framework, perhaps a specific work of art that you might like to connect to from the show or otherwise.
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I got kicked out on the internet, so I'm on my phone until I can connect again. Well, you said it, Denenge, in your introduction, and the thing that struck me is when you said ancestor work. And for me, it's returning to 1492, going to the past, examining what we've lost and how we can go from there without being stuck in 530 years since the conquest of the Americas. And dreaming and thinking about the future by looking at the past, and always looking for the ancestor and the lessons that they may have for us. Always listening and looking for these lessons that we may have lost in the past. I think in the film that I have in the show, it's a diptych with two moving images. One of them is of an Indigenous woman that I've been collaborating with, Zapotec from Oaxaca, who is a weaver, and she taught me how to weave in a backstrap loom. I knew how to weave before, but when I started investigating weaving, I found that it was indeed a very futuristic practice, because from the Mayan perspective, it's a feminine cosmos that is invoked. The goddess of the moon taught women how to weave. And so that's my point of departure, always going back to the weaving and look at this feminine cosmology, and to that cosmos for these aspirational modalities that I'm looking for, which are really, I'm just so dissatisfied with the way things are, that instead of just rolling into a ball in despair, I decided I was going to take that approach. And then looking not just to my, Mexican background, but also to other indigenous communities all over the world to see what they had to give. And so from the perspective of weaving, so she's in the film and she is always moving. It's the movement, right? Because imperialism wants to render bodies of color, indigenous bodies, still. They're always put in relation to, for instance, of the temples. They're always looking at them, as if they're looking at, gazing at their past, and they're frozen in time. And so I wanted to keep her going. And next to it is I'm invoking the feminist uprisings in Mexico City, all over Mexico, really, and what they've been doing, the Mexican feminist uprising and, quote unquote, rioting, and making that connection to what happened in the summer of 2020 as well here, sort of like the solidarity between movements, and this idea of just keep moving, so that we're always in the future. If we keep moving, we're always in the future, despite what was done to us, starting with 1492.
Okay, thank you so much, Terry. Really appreciate that. Yes, so many threads. I'm very excited by this, and thank you, each of you, for that brief description. So my next question really ties in with what you've already been talking about in terms of the material choices to the how. And under this lens of futurism, how is your art futurist from a process point of view? And I know we've already kind of touched on that a little bit as we're thinking about process and material. How does the material of your work and the process of creating it, your hand, all of that within it, does it represent social commentary or a message to future generations in its making material presentation? Are there ritual aspects, perhaps, communing with otherworldly forces, or a ritual that is enacting something? Or material based in how you approach futurity or the speculative, that what if? So envisioning possibly, what something could look like, perhaps. And, I'm thinking here about in terms of, oh goodness, I had it all written. Cydney, is it you have a background in architecture? Yeah, so thinking about that, and also this question of narrative. So I guess I would just want to hear a little bit more about your material choices and the process of creation and how that puts you within a kind of space of futurity. And the question, very long question, is in the chat. So we can start with whoever is most excited about that question, or we can just start with Cydney. Okay, go for it.
Sorry, that's a great question, because materials is actually what really inspires my work. One of the things is, for me, my work is inspired by materials. Generally, when I'm walking down the street and I'm just paying attention to the present and nature and what I see in nature that is just kind of thrown away and tossed away and in the trees and on the ground, whether it's, in this case, the photo that you're seeing now, this tall kind of sculptural piece is made out of synthetic hair, which I got the idea because I'm walking down the street and I see this glob of something on the ground, and it's synthetic hair or hair that's been tossed around. And I go to the beauty supply shop and it's opened with tons of some hair, and that's some part of who we are. It just opened up a lot of conversation among people of just what hair was about. Also plastic. And I began just thinking about what if we lifted up the land field and there was a ecosystem it was inspired by all of this waste that we created on our planet that actually just evolved in some sort of other ecosystem. So I'm very inspired by materials, and also materials that are obsolete or going away, like the printed material. So a lot of my work started recently being with collage and paper, because that was starting to, and especially the printed material, just finding a magazine is becoming obsolete. My show, the piece that I have in the show is called Unearthing Pathways on the Way to the Grocery Store. And part of the reason why I named it that was I used plastic and I twisted the plastic. It's made out of dry cleaning bags, and I twisted it to make another form. And also I used the paper bag, because when about 20 years ago, that was a conversation that everyone was having, whether it was paper or plastic, when you went to the grocery store. And as a collective, we chose plastic, and it became tons of logos, and everyone made things out of plastic bags. And now we have that same conversation, that same question is now being asked, paper or plastic. So the installation that I have in the Hyde Park Art Center in the Dream exhibit is showing these figures involved in this mural of an environment made out of plastic and paper. And it's meant to be an installation where when you're away from it, it's something that you have to really walk into to really discover and pay attention to the details of what's in the space, which is something that I feel that we have to start, as I say, become more conscious of what materials that we're using, and developing materials that we can start to work with the environment opposed to against the environment. I'm very interested in biomimicry and how we are starting to develop materials that disintegrate into the earth, but also work with the earth opposed to these plastic and materials that are not working for us. So for me, that's part of like looking at the past, the present, and the future. And I try to develop those conversations in the work that I'm doing.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Cydney. I'm struck, by, in terms of your materials, this week in my Afro-Futurity class, we were looking at the work of Lauren Halsey in LA, and the activism in her work, and also in her reference in a lot of ways to George Clinton, Parliament Funkadelic, and the way that she is kind of honoring and reclaiming vernaculars, Black vernaculars, urban vernaculars, AAV, signage, all of the materiality of, the spaces that she inhabits, and that her communities inhabit. And so, thinking about, this kind of unpacking what is waste, who considers what to be waste, and these questions of sustainability. And also I'm struck, as you're talking about this desire to kind of immerse the audience, or immerse the kind of monumentality that you're playing with in concert with the intricacy. That sort of, this constant sort of play with scale, and that gaze that Terry, you were talking about earlier. I guess this question is also for Terry, thinking about under this, in terms of process and material. I've been really, really struck. Did we lose? Okay, there you are. I'm sorry, I'm not sure if we lost you. Terry, if you maybe want to speak to this question. I know you've already talked a bit about material. I'm really entranced by this piece, by this sort of location specificity in some ways that the materials suggest, but then also there's a kind of a new world or new space suggested. So can you talk with us about how you engage futurism with the material? or the speculative what if. Yeah.
Yes, well, those are weavings, and of course I already talked about that. And so I'm imagining this fence that's around the Washington Park Monument, the Washington Monument, protecting the general from, you know, the uprising, the people that are uprising, you know, which is to them that signal to the future, right? It's the history, the history of racism in this country being protected by a chain link fence. And so I'm making that connection to the feminist uprisings in Mexico, where the future is this destruction of the monument, the rubble that will be found by, you know, people in the future, and the fence itself liberating itself from its job of protecting this monument, going up into where the goddess of the moon resides, and she wants her weavings back, kind of thing, you know. But this is an object, and objects have limitations. And so in doing this work, that's what I found. You know, I'm a maker, but I really started out as a filmmaker and photographer. And so basically what I am, where I am with material at the moment is, it's the idea. Whatever the idea calls for, that's what I do, you know, and that's probably why I know how to do a lot of things in terms of techniques and media. At the moment, my ideas call for new media, 3D modeling, virtual reality, and especially sound. And because that gives me a freedom not to illustrate, a freedom to create more avenues. And the concept that I'm invoking is the slipstream, and it's taken from Native American science fiction. It's a mode of science fiction where the past kind of rears its head in the present, or where the story is taking place, such as, you know, Custer kind of being lost in time and going back and forth to this outpost, being in this, I'm taking this from a story that really impacted me, you know? And so all the slipstreams are maybe all the frequencies from transmissions, sounds, the visual. And so I want to invoke that particular modality of time. Time is not linear. So how does time manifest itself outside of this linear Western way of measuring it? So that's what each element, that's what I see it. And so all these intersections, you know, like I said, the futurity of the movements of liberation are in this intersectionality of movements, you know, sort of like, you know, with Black Lives Matter, and then what happened in Palestine. And so keep thinking not just, oh, this is an isolated thing, right? Like Ukraine is not isolated. It's just that now it's happening to white people, you know? It's like you gotta think beyond the event to really what we can do together. And so whatever material technique is needed, so that's what I have to invoke. And if I have to, you know, use every last brain cell that I have to learn it, I will do so, unless somebody wants to give me a bunch of money to hire people to do it. But yeah, I this is, you know, a print work, and I was playing around with how the mythology of the goddess informs feminism, instead of taking the image of the Virgin Guadalupe, who serves the patriarchy. So I was collapsing the two images and excavating and trying to unearth pieces of the myths, in order to say, look, you know, invoking sort of like quietly. And actually, it actually happened, not that I had anything to do with it, but my mind was in the right place, of the women in Mexico, the feminists, going nuts, saying, we've had enough, we're not going to be nice anymore, we're going to destroy and spray paint these monuments. And that is the idea of the monster goddess that comes from Aztec mythology and, you know, other mythologies around the world, of it's okay, if the patriarchy tells us, you have to be nice and, oh, what kind of, you're a monster and, you're a witch. And I'm saying it's okay because that's what's going to get you your freedom.
Thank you so much, Terry. So many wonderful thoughts here, and thinking about, your mention here of the slipstream, which, we talk about also in relationship to code. Think about Sun Ra. We travel the spaceways, techno in Detroit with Drexia, who never showed their faces, but were, basically creating this new space of kind of digital connection. Paul Miller, DJ Spooky talks about that, and this sort of reframing, time as composite, time as spiral, shifting outside of these frameworks of how we even understand our own temporality. That brings me, I'm thinking back to what you said then, Terry, about weaving and the feminine cosmos. And I'd like to kind of use that to move into the next question, which is more of a why. Now, again, they're not all limited just to this, but gives us a framework to kind of play off of in our conversation. BIPOC futurisms are often about representation, community connection, and co-creative processes, whether you're co-creating with self, with others, even thinking about sight. Cydney, I see a lot of this in Terry and your work as well. With the material itself becomes a kind of a co-collaborator. So when we're thinking about these new or reclaimed narratives and representation also within that framework, figurative or representation in material. Cydney, you've talked about some materials that are going away, print. I'd like maybe if Monica, if you could speak to your work is in terms of your descriptions and the material itself. You're looking also at being Potawatomi, Black, and German in terms of the way that you're pulling those legacies into the work and bringing those together, highlighting Nshike Revolt, Kitihawa, and some other moments in history that I was in particular, I think it was the Waskana Doyen, I hope I'm saying that correctly, where there was, you can say it.
Yeah.
Okay. One.
Yeah.
And the Madalamba piece in pastel, where it looks like you're bringing together some of those legacies into one. So can you talk a little bit about that in terms of the why, the approach to narratives and representation in the work?
So I was a good student, but I always questioned certain things. I'm like, okay, well, I'm hearing a lot about what's happening with these old dead white men. What happened with the rest of the world? What happened with these what were the women doing? Like, what were the trans people doing at that time? What were the gay people doing at that time? Like, there's all these stories that I feel like kept getting lost. And at a very early age, I loved sitting around listening to my Aunt May tell me stories. And I remember thinking at one point, like, this is going to be so awful when she passes and nobody else knows what these stories are. And I can't share whatever insight or wisdom or just even just a funny moment in time. I just wanted to make sure so many of those stories were able to get out there. So I don't bead, but that's very traditional, particularly for Potawatomi people, and applique on, so like floral patterns on Black fabric is actually pretty big, and you'd see a lot at powwows and different things. So I was like, well, I don't know how to do that, but I do like working off of Black paper, and I love making those colors pop because it's, it's just so vibrant. So the woman in this image on the right is all about missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two spirits. And I wanted to show enough representation of this affects all ages. It affects the youth, it affects older women, trans folks, the mixed identity women. And if you notice, all of them except one have a red handprint over their mouth. And that is symbol within the movement of just making sure people are aware that this is an epidemic that's happening in Indian country. Women are being domestically abused all the time, like 4 out of 5, guarantee, you know. And this is my piece where I'm actually talking about what happened to me. So I was sexually abused, and I have also experienced just some really inappropriate behavior on the red line and stuff. And I just think of how much of a shame it is that so many women are either silent about this or just feel like, what are we going to do? Like, this is just our reality and we have to live with it. And this representation was supposed to show like, okay, this literally does affect so many women, and you walk right by them and you don't even realize it. And these are beautiful, just beautiful, gorgeous women that don't deserve this at all. They're flowers. So that's what the title is actually also pulling from a Potawatomi word representing flowers. So the image to the left is actually a collaboration I did with a friend of mine. And the top part is in Cherokee, and it says, it translates to, we keep building fires. And he and I were talking about how do we keep, like, you know, when you think about like how these myths or these other stories that cultures have just told over generation after generation, how do those even start? How do we get those going? And why don't people start trying to look into that right now? Like, what do they need to talk about? Like, what's going on in today's times? So this is kind of me getting into more of that spirit realm and just kind of giving forms to these entities that, you know, there's something in us that creates a passion or this fire that wants us to keep, like, no, you just keep tapping into that or just keep representing it. And I love pop-ups or pop-outs. So this was my attempt at that. And I'm still getting the hang of it, but for the most part, I like it. So yeah, that will be part of a bigger story I'll tell later. This new image, this is actually an inspiration from a piece I'm doing at the Field Museum. So there is a mural that's going up, or actually it is up now. But the exhibition will be open May 20th this year. And it's, the Native American Hall hadn't been remodeled for about 60 years, and it showed, and there was just no love and care. So they got funding for it, so it's completely being remodeled, and it's already looking really fabulous. And I will have 3 pieces in the section We Speak for Ourselves. And for the mural that this one is referring to is about the Great Lakes. And this one in particular is about Lake Michigan. And yeah, it's just kind of telling a new story of like, how would like, just in today's times with these spirit, like if the lakes had spirit form, what would they to talk about when it comes to humans and what we're doing, or either encroaching, polluting, something like, and how do they communicate? It must be so frustrating for these spirits, because, you know, they want to just live and be and, you know, do the thing and keep being sustainable. So that's kind of why I'm tapping into like some of these older ways of like pastels and going back into, like, this is the first sculpture I've done. So I definitely want to tap a little bit more into that for the future, but, you know, I just want to give these spirits forms. So that's a little bit about that.
Thank you so much, Monica. Wonderful, wonderful. Cydney, I wanted to ask you about that question as well, as we're thinking about representation, whether through figurative or through materiality, and a reclamation of narrative, or what narrative perhaps new narrative perhaps that you're trying to put forth.
Well, I think for me, imagination, creativity, spirituality and just uplifting consciousness of what we're doing and how we're moving forward is basically the base of my work. I like the fact that, to use your imagination, I just think it builds resilience and moving forward in the future. And I think we've always done it, especially our history with the Dogon tribe and seeing the cosmos and understanding what we knew so much about things that we don't even really, we think that aren't really real at this point. So for me, I like to play around with those kind of things in my work of just kind of like a what if. I've always like asking the question, what is this? So it's never really defined. And I do work intuitively in my work, but yet at the same time, they each tend to have a story when I'm done. And it kind of speaks to me of what that story is and evolves. And it generally has something to do with either my personal life or what's going on that I'm observing at this time. So I work with figurative, but I also work a lot with landscape. Figurative is, it just intertwines depending on what the story is and what I'm telling. But a lot of the pieces are derived. When I began really thinking about the ancients and it evolved into the future and in the present. So I really just kind of go between those two scopes in my work. And so that really sums it up in terms of what I'm thinking. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Cydney. I'm struck by what Monica, you were talking about with the murals. I'm really fascinated and excited by that, the combination of the sculptural work, the painting and drawn work, and then how murals function, kind of historically and moving into the future, not only in their kind of final state perhaps, but in the process of creation, and what that means sort of for community, for representation, and this telling of a new story, the speculative what if, which Cydney, you're kind of speaking to as well with this. Now, I want to kind of lead us into our next and final question, and then there will be space for Q&A, but also if there are other elements that each of you would like to add that these questions didn't perhaps cover. But the last question, we've talked about what, how, why. This one is about future vision. And the question is basically, how do you envision your work living in the world? Speaking of, again, kind of futurisms, Afrofuturity, Indigenous futurisms, Latinx futurisms, that these spaces of BIPOC futurity as dynamic, living, breathing, that the work itself has that kind of, to use a term from Yoruba, ashe, that catalytic life force. In the making of it, your relationship to it while you're making it, my relationship as I'm an audience member taking it in, our communing, our convening together has, this ache energy, the catalytic life force. And thinking about within the space, for instance, of divinations, we've been talking a lot this week about prescriptives or diagnostics, that a diviner would be a diagnostician. And so it's also a reframing of how we even think about, the sciences, a merging of the spirit with the AI, which is a tale that, a lot of people investigate. So how, in thinking of this, how do you envision your work living in the world? And again, that's a big question, but if you can each kind of speak to that, how it does live or how it may live, where you'd like to see it going, et cetera, how it is a dynamic entity of its own. Cydney, I'll start with you.
This one's tough in a way, because let's see, I envision, let's just say I like working big. My background's in set design, and I worked in film for years as set design. So I like transformation. I think that's what I'm really why I'm drawn to so much to film, of a way of thinking differently and transforming into something that you wouldn't expect. So I'd like I'd like to involve more materials that are like maybe bioplastics or more organic materials in my work. I like how I'm getting bigger, but also I like being smaller as well. So for me, I just like the expansion of where the work can take me. And I, of course, see it global. So because I think that this is a conversation that isn't just about Afro-Futurism or Indigenous futurism. It's really about futurism of humanity. So, and one day perhaps we can just realize that we're humans and we need to all come together and make this happen, because this planet, I mean, that's why I think that I'm very interested in conservation of this planet, because that is, important, especially right now. It's been important for a long time, but right now we're at a urgency level. So.
Thank you, Cydney. Monica, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. So I'm finally able to work on bigger scales, so that's nice. But it's also combining traditional techniques and aspects into digital. So I've also, like when I was doing the mural, they said, all right, here's some dimensions, we'll scale it up for you so you don't have to worry about that. And I was like, wonderful, I can do that. And I was like, oh my God, I love this technique now. So I'll probably be doing a lot more layering with the pastels in the future, but I also don't want to completely rely on just digital works, because I'm also like, oh, what if everything just crashes? Like I just lose all of that. Like, where will it go? So I definitely want to have something I can physically hold and just, whatever. But I work with this group called Center for Native Futures. So when I say work with, I actually helped start this nonprofit. And the main thing was we didn't see a native, like a fine art or fine tuning of Native arts here in Chicago or just the Midwest in general. So we want to make sure that we had a place for Native people to come, do their art, go be weird, go experiment, break out of the stereotypical, this is what this should look like. Like I want people to be like, and if they love, just like, here's my spin on basket weaving, or here's my spin on beadwork or something, like we want to keep encouraging that. So when I think about the future, sometimes it's not always about me. It's like, well, what about everybody else? Or what about these other Native stories that haven't been told, or these other artists that don't get those opportunities? So a lot of times I'm trying to be like, okay, well, how do we elevate them? How do we make sure that those stories are out there? Because often overlooked, overshadowed, and not even brought up with diversity, equity, and inclusion, programming. So I will keep fighting for that. And that's it.
Thank you, Monica. And I'm really intrigued by, to kind of go back to the murals and thinking about, because usually murals have a reach that isn't quite the same as, say a sculpture that might be, maybe would be an exhibition for a particular period of time, or maybe would be collected then by, a collector, and then or even if it's collected by a museum, sometimes something will be seen and it's brought out and there's a big to-do, 20 or 30 or 40 years that something may be in a collection but hasn't been seen, which is different from how it lives perhaps in a collector's home with certain groups and demographics would have access. And so with the murals, I'm curious about how those have lived or continue to live. For instance, the one that you're doing at the Field Museum, is this permanent? Is this, what is the length of time it will be seen? Also think of the process of who's involved in creating them with you.
So as far as we know, that's just not coming down. So there's no plans on taking that down, that was marvelous to hear. So that will be accessible to the public. I love that whole idea. I want these characters to actually have their own story. I mean, I love storyboarding. I love comic books. And, if I can help bring those characters even more to life, like if there's a little short story, or like a children's book or little animation, something, like I would love to see that actually take off. So we'll see how it goes and see how it's received. People actually get it. I think that's also, I'm like, I hope they get it, but so far so good.
Yeah, I'm so intrigued with the pop-up. Years ago I did book design, and we got to make pop-up books, and so I'm really intrigued by thinking even about the dimensionality, kind of going back to some of what Cydney was saying, and the idea that you've got the mural and then there's a whole story and then there are books, and and I think also we talk about sustainability when it comes to material and planet, but also sustainability of the artist. And so putting on my career advisor hat, that's having the books and that material that brings the mural alive in new ways, and also provides a kind of sustenance for you and for those who would create those. Yeah, Terry, do you want to speak with this, how you envision your film, sculpture, other projects kind of living in the world, continuing to kind of, yeah, that's the question.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been saying for a while that installation sculpture that I put up at Hyde Park Art Center is going to be my last object in a while, because I've become more and more interested in creating systems that enable discursive symbiosis between humans that point at the symbiosis that we are living in, right? Like Gaia and everything, we are all like living in the same earth, doing our thing, and just kind of pointing to that, because that's what's needed if it's not too late, and because that speaks to being ecological. And I'm really interested in that, just creating a system that places the viewer in the center, in the midst of everything, instead of up front looking at something. And I think that sound really is the perfect material for that. And so right now I have a system that I created. It's an installation. I call it a system to generate. So I'm inviting people to become ancestors, basically. So I have tape recorders and people, and I see the tape that I have recorded, the first tape as the warp, and people get to put their own stamp on it by fast forwarding, rewinding, recording, doing whatever they want. And that's the weft. So we're weaving with sound. So I provide the warp and the participants come, sort of, I've done that before with an actual loom, where people come in and they weave their stripe, and then, they learn how to weave or whatever. So then, a weaving that's a collective result is created. And so I'm doing that with sound right now with this installation. And that's the kind of thing that excites me going forward. Just more ephemeral practices that really highlight the repertoire and not the archive, the repertoire of Indigenous people, of peoples all over the world that don't fall into the European model. It's like a tiny area in the world that we've been like kowtowing for 530 years. And that's the thing that I want to undo, that like people don't even realize it, but that's what they're doing, And so how do you, that's the way that you dismantle white supremacy. That's the way that you unlearn imperialism, by these little gestures that just ask these questions or ask people to engage with the work of art in a different way, besides just looking, because looking is it's the Western way of looking at art. But what else is there? Where are the other four senses? And so that's where I'm headed, which I don't know, people don't like to hear that I'm not going to weave anymore, but I am. I mean, Cydney and I have a show coming up at Heaven. So I'm going to make a couple of weavings for that probably. So we need, but yeah, that's what excites me really about the work. But, everything that I've done has led me to this point. It's not like you know, it's just lost. And for me, that's I'm not interested in selling, you know, paintings or works of art. That's not my thing. You know, I just want to see how I can just do my part to dismantle white supremacy. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Terry. I'm fascinated by this refusal also. I mean, as you're saying, everything you've done has brought you to where you are, and this, you know, it's essential to that. This invitation to become ancestor, the warp and the weft in sound is just, I get so excited thinking about, you know, as you talk about it, I want to participate. I feel like this is an entry point, you know, and so I think this sort of leads back to, in so many ways, to what other folks are talking about in terms of this kind of the invitation, a kind of an interactivity that is kind of predicated on, I'm entering this knowing that this is an invitation to become ancestor. So there's no other sort of, you know, this is what it's about. And so I think part of this is kind of establishing, we're not explaining or you know, showing this in contrast to how, you know, Western or white supremacist systems, invitation to become ancestor. It's just our, you know, our systems and ways of understanding are just, that's just fact, not going to explain it going in. And thinking about our role in the gaze, I'm, you know, speaking of, you know, Afro-Futurism, futurity, and the Black Arts Movement, one of the co-founders of Black Arts Movement, Amiri Baraka, has this wonderful essay that is called Bopera Theory, where it's bop opera. And he talks about the use of music, the use of sound, and the way that we live in a lower register. We've been trained to live in a lower register. Connected with that, the idea that we are all synesthetic at birth, that we are trained to become compartmentalized as far as our senses. He says, you know, add 5 more to the 5 we have, and then we'll start to get somewhere. So I'm so excited hearing about, you know, each of your approaches to this, such diversity in the way that you're approaching that idea of envisioning the work living in the world. So I just want to finally open it up. We're ready for questions here, but before we have any questions, is there anything that any of you, the panelists, would like to add briefly? Anything that we didn't perhaps quite get to, just briefly, before we have a couple of questions?
Just real quick, I'm going to shout out to Cydney, because I didn't even realize how much of an inspiration you were when I was looking at your work. Because it was like, oh yeah, the layering and the pop out. I was like, yeah, that's totally, yes, please. So I was like, how do I incorporate that? So thank you.
We didn't have a picture of the installation, so too bad, but thank you. And while we're shouting out Terry, I'm looking forward to Terry and I have a show at Heaven Gallery in May, and it should be really interesting because she just inspired me with the other senses. So it's gonna be fun.
Yeah. And when does that open? Do you? Oh, well, you said in May, so we can look at it.
May 20th.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. Okay.
And Cecilia and I are going to be showing as well at Flexus. I'm sorry she didn't come tonight, so you know our prayers are with her. But we have a show also. I'll be showing together, and well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, I do have an image of the installation that I can show of Cydney's work from the actual exhibition as well. Let me pull that up now.
I also want to just say one thing about the center program. I mean, it's been a wonderful program that we've been in, and I encourage any artists out there to try and participate in it. I mean, just the panelists alone and being able to do this, I've met so many good friends, and my work has expanded because of it. I think we all can speak to that in some way. So just a shout out to the Hyde Park Art Center.
Yeah, that was one of my questions in particular. Like, how were you all thinking about futurism in your work and taking this professional development program, which is investing in your future? How did that kind of lead you to interpret your work or your practice differently? Because from what I know, you're supposed to do something outside of what your normal practice is and kind of reimagine your work and your practice in general. So if you all could just speak a bit to that. I was particularly enthralled in like Mayumi's work, working 2D and then creating this sculptural work in a completely like large scale 3D. And Moni, you said that you are able to work in a larger scale, and Terry, you incorporating more video and things. How did the center program influence all of that? Whoever.
Well, for me, I think the proposal included putting the weaving in outside of like the wall space, beyond, like imagining different spaces. And I don't know what that was gonna look like, you know. And then I was thinking about AR kind of, because I was so dissatisfied when I was finished with these weavings I did with metal, and I was putting them, and you know, I was like satisfied for like a couple minutes, and then I was like, well, now what? You know, I made an object, so where is this going? And so I was thinking about expanding it and going somewhere else, which that AR VR component just kind of went into another direction. And that was informed with what I was living. You know, I named the installation Where I Am and Where I'm Not. Where I am is the south side of Chicago. I'm looking at this statue of Washington with this fence around it, and I'm a Mexican woman that is not participating in the uprisings in Mexico because I live here and I'm here. So it was sort of like putting together those two ways of being, which it's always been my life, kind of nomadic and with one foot in one history and another foot in another history. And trying to make sense of that, you know, with the help of the cohort and all the guests and Asha, Tulika, and Mike. And I really, you know, took their input seriously, you know, what they were saying, and I just ran with it, and that was the result.
Oh, for me, I think that this is the first time I was able to work at such a large scale, and also I as well as Terry is interested in doing AR and augmented reality, and I think this allowed me to take such a two-dimensional small space and make it bigger in scale. And now the next step is I can play with starting to use AR because my goal is to to be more interactive in the space so that it starts to come out and from the wall and into that area. And the center program helps me develop and kind of center that idea. And it will take steps, but at least I've projected one part of it at a large scale that would allow me to now see the next steps and give me a future of where I might want to take this and where I might want to go.
Getting to meet so many amazing other artists and seeing how they are in different parts of their career definitely gave me some goals and things to reach for, and you know, try to get some advice from people and just move forward in how I want to think about my own art and like the sustainability. And do I want to just stay with just 2D realm, or do I want to go into 3D? Do I want to expand? Do I want to collaborate with some new folks? You know, I feel like this whole last year, Hyde Park Art Center just adopted me, and it was wonderful. Like at the end of the year, I even had a small residency, and I was like, thank you. Like, I understand space and why it's so important. Because I'd be able to just cut off the world and just focus on the art and spread out everything and all the ideas. So if you can get in, do it. Hang out with these folks because they're amazing.
Thank you all so much. And it looks like we just have one more question from Shauna Pryor. Hello, Shauna. Shauna asks, can each of you recommend a favorite book, website, or other reference on the subject of Afrofuturism? And if you can't speak to Afrofuturism, maybe just the concept of futurism in general. Thank you.
Well, I know that I reread the book Afrofuturism, The World of Black Sci-Fi and Fantasy Culture, which our own Denenge is mentioned in. And it was a wonderful book just to give you an overall idea of Afrofuturism. So it's one I recommend.
Sunrise poetry, can't get enough of it. Just always go back to it, even if it's just for like one poem. You know, it just reminds me, keeps me in line. It's so beautiful, and it just points to that. So you probably, Shauna, already, you know, have it or read it, but I will always recommend it. Yeah.
Terry, Terry, there's a book that a couple of MFA grads from the school edited. While Monica is talking, I want to run and get it so I can show it to you. It's Sunrise poetry translated into Spanish. And I bought it at Expo a couple years ago, the last one before things kind of shut down, from a book vendor based in Mexico City. And I'm gonna go and grab it so at least you can see the cover of it. But I've been wanting to like delve into it, like sing it, you know, something.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Yeah, I'm gonna run and get it to show you.
Sorry, I was looking up the name. I don't know. Probably a book I would recommend would be by Grace Dillon for Indigenous Futurism. It's called Walking the Clouds, an anthology of Indigenous science fiction. Also check out this native artist called Ryan Singer. He does some amazing stuff with Star Wars. But puts them on the res, and I love it so much. The paintings are just hilarious and wonderful, and I love how even now you're seeing how Disney's like, oh yeah, what about these other cultures, like on these Star Wars worlds? Like what was life like there?
Yeah, I was going to recommend Walking the Clouds too. That's a really good book.
Amazing. Denenge, you are on mute still.
So this is Mariana Castillo de Ball, Tanya Islas Weinstein, and Alberto Ortega. Alberto went to the school. So I'm trying to do this so that it shows the cover. Well, this is kind of fun, sort of like sci-fi vibe here. Here we go, if you can see.
Yes, that's better. You can see the title.
Yeah. So look for this. I could try to see where it's from, but I think you would, you know, this would be really lovely to look into. Artis Libris.
Amazing.
I definitely will get that. I have another book. It's Indigenous Futurisms. It's actually a show that was in New Mexico in the Museum of Native American Art, and it has really good essays in it. You can get it directly from the museum.
Just want to thank everyone. I know, Sierra, you probably have your thanks also, but thank you so much, Cydney, Monica, Terry. It's been such a joy to talk with you. So thank you for inviting me into your space. And congratulations on the show. It's incredible.
Yes. Thank you so much, Denenge, for moderating this conversation and being so thoughtful with your questions, and to our panelists for bringing forth all of this work and participating in such a rigorous program and completion. It's a beautiful, beautiful exhibition that we currently have up at the Hyde Park Arts Center. I'm just going to share my screen so that you all can see. The exhibition is on view through March 20th, so you do have plenty of time to come and check that out. It is curated by Asha Iman Veal, wonderful, wonderful curator, who also has a show up currently at the Museum of Contemporary Photography. We also have a number of programs in conjunction with the center program. Our next one is by Jonathan Castillo, featuring his immigrant-owned project, interviewing and having conversations and taking photographs of immigrant small business owners. And that will be in person on Thursday, March 17th from 5 to 7 p.m. And there will be a tour of his work in the exhibition, as well as immigrant business owners who will be present to talk about their businesses and their work as well too. And then our next program is Whispers of Words, which is in conjunction with our exhibition by Malika Jackson. In honor of National Poetry Month, her exhibition features a lot of poetry from Langston Hughes, Maya Angelou, Sonia Sanchez, and we will have local poets bringing this poetry to life. So Nikki Patton, Frankie Mitchell, Rach Jackson, and Leslie Honore will be present doing poetry. So please make sure that you come and check out these in-person events that we have coming up. And lastly, check us out online at hydeparkart.org for more information about our exhibitions and programs, and follow us on social media to stay in tune with what we have going on. Again, thank you so much, and we hope that you all have a wonderful evening. This will be recorded, so if you'd like to share the conversation or the program again, feel free to do so. But with that, everyone have a great night. Happy National Women's History Month. What a wonderful panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.